Nick Stern, who our inspiration, who came to Assam in 2007-8, along with Bittu Saigal, another very close friend, is the I.G. Patel Professor of Economics and Government Board Director of the India Observatory and Chair of the Grantham Research Institute at the London School of Economics.
So you can see why so many of us think that Paul is one of the great inspirational, indeed the outstanding inspirational business leader of our time. And in his 10 years as the CEO of Unilever, its stock market value, which is of course the very conventional thing which we're trying to broaden, but nevertheless the stock market value went up dramatically, and they now get 2 million job applications a year. They get the very best of the young people, and that means that that firm has a very good future. So Paul is a clear example of what can be done, and that firms can be profitable whilst doing good. And indeed, actually, they become profitable by doing good. What I wanted to do in my time is to, and I'll try to keep it down because I realize we're running late, is to give two pieces of context, COVID and COP26, but do it in a way that emphasizes investment and investment in natural capital, because that's, in very broad terms, what we're trying to do here, is foster investment in natural capital. Investment needs returns to come about, so how do we generate those returns? Now, if you look at COVID, and it is indeed a terrible tragedy, but I hope and think that people are drawing lessons from that tragedy. That's the way we advance as human beings. We try to learn from our experiences. And one thing I think that is a shared learning from this experience is that if you do the kind of deep damage to our climate, environment, and biodiversity that we have been doing, you change the way in which human animals, domestic animals, and wild animals interact amongst themselves and across those groups, and you make the emergence of viruses much more likely. And the big majority, as we know, of pathogens are zoonotic. Human pathogens come from animals. So I think there is a realization that we have to take our environment and climate and biodiversity still more seriously than we have been doing. I think a second lesson from COVID is that we can change very quickly. So the first lesson is no going back. The old system was really fragile and dangerous. No going back, build back better. The second lesson is that we can change very quickly. And it's remarkable how rapidly we have changed. So we shouldn't shrug our shoulders and say, yes, we recognize the change we have to make, but it's all too difficult. Actually, we've seen that we can move very fast. So those are big lessons. No going back. We can change very fast, that we've learned from COVID. There are more, of course, about our sense of community, our common humanity, about husbanding our resources when we're in lockdown, about seeing how quickly a better air quality can come through and how quickly animals can move back. All those things we've seen from COVID. But what I want to emphasize here is not just the lessons from COVID, important though they are, I've tried to summarize, but also the recovery from COVID. And what we've learned is, and what we're seeing, is that a sustainable recovery is a strong recovery. The sustainability agenda, the things we have to do that we know we have to do from the point of view of sustainability, are in fact the best way to recover. And let me pay tribute to Keynes here, because what we want is something that can be done quickly, something that is labor intensive, and something that has strong multipliers. Those are the investments we should look for. Rapid in implementation, labor intensive, strong economic multipliers in terms of generation of other activities. That's what Keynes would have looked for, and he would have been right. And where can you find those things? Well, top of the list is natural capital, restoring degraded land, planting trees, managing our water systems. All these things are things we have to do, and they're fast, labor-intensive, and strong multipliers. So the sustainable recovery is the best route to the strong recovery. There's no tension. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The drive to sustainability will be the drive to a strong recovery. And if we do the strong recovery well, it will be sustainable. And that is a very powerful lesson that we have to embed in public policy. There are other things we can do quickly, labor-intensive, strong multipliers too. For example, retrofitting our buildings and making them much more efficient. Again, fast, labor-intensive, strong multipliers. But of course, in this gathering, I wanted to emphasize the investment in natural capital first. And that, of course, will lead us to the kind of transformational development story, the drive to zero carbon, which will be the growth story of the 21st century, sustainable, inclusive, resilient. So that's the first part of the story, taking the lessons from COVID and recognizing the best way to recovery, which is the sustainable route. We need to establish that right across the world, country by country, because we all have the lead on that. The second thing I wanted to point to in the web context was COP26. Like Paul, I'm deeply involved in trying to make success of COP26, now taking place in Glasgow at the end of 2021. And the key themes are net zero, number one, resilience, number two, and natural capital, number three. So we've started to embed this story in the overall narrative and sense of direction for COP26. And that's enormously important. And net zero and the language and concept of net zero have transformed the way in which many people think, and rightly so, about the strategy on climate and how to implement it. So you, as Paul described, firm after firm has declared for net zero. And the great simplicity in net zero is that a city can do it, a town or a village, a university. They can all, in a firm in particular, they can declare for net zero and make that a measurable objective for the firm. And what happens when you do that? Well, you see, as Paul mentioned, Microsoft declare for not only net zero by 2040, but to capture the emissions of the past. So they're not going to just get the flows down to net zero. They're going to try to make amends for the emissions, or take account of the emissions in the past. You get BP and Shell, the two big UK-based oil firms, as you know very well, which have said that they will aim to go net zero, not only in their own operations, but also in the burning of their products. So that, if you just take those two examples, and there's so many more, and Paul described some of them, you see that there'll be a huge demand for natural capital. And one of the opportunities now, which is, I think, going to grow very quickly, and it's best to be on the right side of that market and to go big, is to show what natural capital investments there are available. And I think that's much more than the trading in offsets. And it's very important to be clear it's much more than trading in offsets. What we're looking for here is real investment on a big scale in natural capital. So we have a tremendous opportunity to offer to Microsoft or BP or Shell, whoever it might be, real investments that are genuine additions to natural capital, and of course, as such, give you negative emissions. That is a market that is really going to grow very strongly, and it's important that it grows well, that it grows in a transparent, honest, genuinely productive way. And that's something that's in our hands. And that's something where we can set standards, but above all, in the case of the kind of rewilding that we're seeing here, demonstrate as real investment. We all know that investment requires flows, revenue flows to finance, revenue flows to make it viable. I really think that something's changed in this last 2 or 3 years around the declaration of firms for net zero that can generate these streams. That doesn't involve actually a decision in COP26. It doesn't involve a decision on the famous Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This is about enabling investment that big firms can record as straight reductions that they have helped bring about. It's very important that that's done well, but this is an enormous opportunity, which I think could be constitute a very valuable revenue stream. So let me come to a close just by celebrating what work you're doing here. I'm someone who's worked for 45 years, actually more than 45 years on and in India, and I've worked for more than 30 years on and in China. They are unambiguously the two most important countries in the world by any reasonable assessment. And to see the kind of collaboration around this huge agenda that has come through the activities here is just of enormous importance. There's so many dimensions on which we find friction in the world. And if we can find ways of coming together around the big threats and the big challenges, that is enormously important. I think it will make us work better with other countries, other parts of the world, on the other dimensions which are relevant too. But showing the productivity of collaboration in the face of this immense set of global threats around the environment, climate, and biodiversity is enormously important. And the case, this cross-country collaboration is the most important of all, the India-China collaboration. It also demonstrates a quite extraordinary geographical range. I mean, we all know, you know it better than I do, but this is from the highest mountains to the oceans. It is quite extraordinary. It involves the greatest rivers of the world in terms of the people they serve. This is a quite extraordinary example. And I've had the great pleasure to spend time with Ranjit and family in Assam, in Kaziranga. And we even had the pleasure of being charged by a very vigorous rhino at one point, and you'll be very happy to know that we escaped. But experiencing in Kaziranga the extraordinary beauty of that place, seeing very close to it trees that have been destroyed, that you know were unnecessarily destroyed and can be replaced. And to see that replacement, that rewilding actually happening is enormously encouraging. And the challenge, of course, will be to create a revenue streams. Formally, we want to value it, and that will be a part of the public policy story. But to get the investment going is about revenue streams. And that's what I tried to focus on there. And I'll conclude with just one last example, which Ranjit and my friend Ram will know very well from Sanctuary. That is actually helping to create around national parks in the areas of rewilding revenue generating tourism visits, that the people who have the rights to the land those revenues can be generated and used by they themselves. And that's a system which is beginning to work, which I think is enormously important. And it's another way of generating revenue streams. And I think that has to be a big focus. I've given just 2 examples of that in relation to revenue streams. They're going to be more, but that creativity will turn what is an enormously beneficial set of activities into a set of activities which have good revenue streams and are actually strong investments. And that's something which we're demonstrating here, and I really believe through your example is going to accelerate. So thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you.